All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and jump into this next exercise here, and it's really not that bad. What we have presented here is some liabilities, or some liabilities from the financial statements, and then we also have a brief statement of stockholders' equity. This looks a little bit more detailed than maybe what you guys have seen previously, so we're just going to kind of go through it step by step methodically, and it's really not going to be that bad. So our first question is, what is the debt ratio? If you guys remember from the handouts that had formulas listed on them for financial statement analysis that you guys may have had for your exam or from your labs, the total debt ratio is going to be total liabilities divided by total assets. But you'll notice up here that we actually aren't given total assets, which complicates things a little bit. But if you'll just remember the financial statements formula, the accounting equation, assets equals liabilities plus equity. So we can simply substitute this for total liabilities plus equity. So not bad at all there. And then if we just do this math real quick, if we go up and look at our total liabilities, we'll see that they equal $17,300,000. $17,300,000. Cool. And then we have total liabilities plus equity. So I'll just do that, liabilities plus equity. That equals $34,180,000. Great. Okay, so those you're actually going to divide. Divide that together, and you're going to get a final percentage from that of 50.6%. So not bad at all. Cruising right along, they ask us what is the annual dividend on the Class A preferred shares. Now there are a few different types of stock that you can have. You can have common stock, which is what you guys are most experienced with at this point. You can have preferred stock. A preferred stock typically just gets preference in terms of distribution of dividends. So if there's only a certain amount of retained earnings available to the company to distribute dividends, the preferred shareholders are going to get their dividend before everyone else does. So the order kind of goes preferred shareholders, then preferred shareholders will receive a portion in kind of parallel to the common shareholders in addition to their set dividend. So you can see here that for our preferred shareholders, we have these Class A folks, and they have 70,000 shares with a kind of set dividend at 3.5%. And then we also have these Class B folks at 98,000 shares, and they have this set rate of 50 cents. Class A and Class B typically just differentiate who receives greater voting rights. That may not necessarily be the case with preferred stock, because preferred stock doesn't always have voting rights or lesser voting rights than common stock. It all really just depends on what the company decides to do. But in this case, we don't really need to know all those nitty-gritty details. All we need to know is what is the annual dividend on the Class A preferred shares. So we're just going to take the total dollar amount of the shares here. That's from up here, Class A, $700,000. And we're just going to multiply that by the set dividend percentage of 3.5%. So pretty easy, and that's going to get you a value of $24,500. And that's going to be the value of the annual dividend on the Class A preferred shares. Now, if we're going for the Class B preferred shares, it's a little bit different because they actually presented our dividend in terms of this 50 cents instead of a percentage. So we're actually going to do this based not on the total dollar value of the shares, but based on the number of shares. So we're going to have 98,000 shares. And again, that's the number of shares. We'll make a little notation there. And we're multiplying that by 50 cents per share. That's that set dividend amount. And that totals out to $49,000. So that's going to be the annual dividend on the Class B preferred shares. So continuing to number 4 here. We're trying to find our shares of common stock outstanding. Now, if you guys watch the other lab exercise video first, you'll know a little bit more about that. But we're going to start with our shares issued. These are all the shares that we issued so far as a company. And if you total them up for common stock, you're going to see it's actually listed here, 270,000 shares issued. Now, notice there's a difference between authorized and issued. The company was authorized to issue a million shares, but they only chose to issue 270,000 shares. So they can issue more in the future. So you've issued 270,000 shares. Again, this is the number of shares. And then if you watch the other video, you remember that with treasury stock, you're actually going to reduce your shares outstanding by the amount that are sitting in your treasury, because they're not outstanding to investors, they're in your treasury, you've bought them back. So we note here that there are 25,000 shares in the treasury. This is kind of formatted funny, but 25,000 shares in the treasury. So we just take our shares issued, we subtract our treasury shares, I'll abbreviate that so it kind of fits here, and we're going to reduce that by the 25,000. Okay, so shares issued, treasury shares, and these are all numbers of shares. Key point there, number of shares. So pretty simple. Just do the math here, total that up, you get 245,000, and that is going to be our shares outstanding at $240,000. Okay, so shares issued minus the shares you have in the treasury is how many shares are actually outstanding for the investors. Okay, moving along, what was the average price the company received for its common stock? So basically, we just want to total up the value that's associated with all of the common stock. So that's going to be our par value plus the paid-in capital associated with that common stock. So we're going to start out with just a common stock par. And we can pull this from up here. So common stock had a $5 par. We issued this many shares. The total par value, whoops, par value of the outstanding stock is going to be this 1,350,000. Okay, coming down here, 1,350,000. Very cool. And then paid in capital. Okay, so any paid in capital associated with this, you can see that we have additional paid in capital here. $5,540,000 dash common. So those are associated with our common stock shares. So 5,540,000, sum those up, and you're going to get a total of 6,890,000. Again, feel free to stop this video at any time to do any calculations if you'd like to check me. And then 6,890,000 is going to be divided by the amount that we have issued. So the reason that we're using issued instead of outstanding is that we're trying to calculate the average price the company received for its common stock upon issuance. So we're going to want to do the number of shares issued, which we had up here. It's 270,000. So we divide by 270,000. Total that up, and you'll see that we get an overall value originally received for our shares issued of $25.52. Solid. Okay. But now we want to find the average price the company paid to repurchase shares of the common stock. So what we do is actually go to our total treasury stock, number of shares. So treasury stock are our share repurchases, and we have 25,000 shares repurchased. The value is $883,000. I was wrong here. We're actually taking the dollar amount, so $883,000. So that's going to be the total dollar value of shares that are sitting in the treasury, and that is calculated at the amount, the market value that the shares were at the point that we repurchased those treasury shares. Does that make sense? So we are taking the number of treasury shares that we bought back multiplied by the value that those treasury shares had on the date that we bought them back. And that total they give us is $883,000. Okay, very cool. So we have treasury stock, and we're going to divide that by the number of shares that we actually have in the treasury. So here's where we actually pull those treasury shares, get the number of shares, divide by 25,000 shares. Cool. All right. So that's going to give us a amount of $35.32. Whoops, $35.32 per share. So that's the average price the company paid to repurchase the shares of common stock. So then they ask us to kind of editorialize here. What reasonable conclusion can you draw from your response to 5 and 6? Well, what I noticed is that 5 is lower than 6. So when we initially issued the stock, we received $25.52 per share on average. But then when we tried to repurchase that stock that we had just issued, we had to pay an amount of $35.32 per share. Now, that's actually a good thing. It shows that our stock has appreciated in value since we issued it. So our stock price on average has gone up about $10, $9 and yeah, about $10. Now, what might justify your response to 7? Why would the stock price rise? Well, if we go back to our initial financial statements here, what kind of evidence do we have to show that the stock price is rising, that the company is healthy? Well, we had the debt ratio, which wasn't super great, but one thing we can look at is on all these figures, what is this massive retained earnings figure sitting here of $9,193,000? That's a pretty significant number. That positive retained earnings shows that the company is maintaining profits. It's profitable. It's getting that residual profit from net income, and it has money to pay dividends. It has actual cash and retained earnings to pay out to their preferred shareholders and their common shareholders. So what might justify a response to 7? It's just going to be that the company is profitable. Sweet. Yeah, little emoji. Things are going good. Cool. Okay, so moving right along, what is the entry? Move that down there. If the company declared a dividend of 75% on its common stock, so this is going to be a cash dividend performed on its common stock. So you guys should know by now that when you have a cash dividend, you debit retained earnings. That's what we pull our dividends out of. And the amount is going to be $183,750. And where did we pull that amount from? It's just 245,000 of the shares outstanding multiplied by 75 cents per share. So the dividend is 75 cents per share. We got that outstanding from earlier in the problem. Now you may ask, why do we do outstanding instead of shares issued? Why would we not issue dividend issue a dividend on all of the shares issued? Well, we can't issue a dividend to ourselves. That would just be silly. So we have 25,000 of these shares sitting in the treasury. We're not issuing a dividend to ourselves. So the only shares that we're issuing a dividend for are the ones that are in the hands of actual investors, not in our treasury. That's 245,000 number of shares. So we pull that down here. So that's the debit to retained earnings. And then when you debit retained earnings for a dividend, you're going to credit that dividend payable. That amount is $183,750, same as that. And then to record the payment of the dividend, well, this is really easy. You guys have done this by now. You're just debiting that dividend payable to back it out. Cool. We don't have that liability anymore. We paid the liability and we credit cash because we have to pay off that liability with something, and we pay it off with cash because this is a cash dividend. So we're getting close to the end here. Number 11, what is the effect on the accounting equation and the debt ratio if the company borrowed $500,000 to repurchase additional shares? Okay, so is there a change to assets? First of all, let's think about that. So our accounting equation is assets equals liabilities plus equation. So they're asking us, what's the effect on the accounting equation? Assets? No, there's no effect to assets. We borrowed $500,000, so that increased the liability. But instead of saving that $500,000 as cash, getting that asset, we went and repurchased a bunch of additional shares. So we don't actually have any effect on assets from this. So no change. Okay. Liabilities? Well, yeah, we did have a change. We borrowed $500,000 of debt. So we increase by $500,000. Now, equity is the tricky one, but remember we used that $500,000 to repurchase additional shares. Now, when we purchase treasury shares off of the market, when we convert them from outstanding shares to treasury shares, we no longer have outside investors holding equity in the company. Treasury stock is a contra account to stockholders' equity, and you'll see this in the other exercise video a little bit more clearly. But safe to say our equity actually decreases by 500,000 from this transaction. And you know that that checks out because by our accounting equation, if liabilities increase by 500,000, well, equity would have to decrease by 500,000 for this to balance. So that's going to be the effect on our accounting equation. Now, what would be the effect on the debt ratio? Well, remember that our debt ratio we did in terms of, let's scroll all the way up, total liabilities over total liabilities plus equity. We increased our total liabilities. So there's an increase on the numerator. We increased total liabilities, but then we decreased equity. So this kind of equals out. So there's no effect on assets. So we increased our total liabilities for this given amount of assets or the given liabilities and equity. So our debt ratio is going to increase, and that makes sense. We got debt. We increased debt for our given assets. We didn't get any assets for it. We simply got some treasury stock for it. We decreased our equity and increased debt. So that's going to increase debt ratio because we increased liabilities also we did not increase total assets, and our total liability and equity changes netted out. Pretty simple way of putting it, but gets the point across. Okay, last question. What is the effect on the accounting equation of the debt ratio if the company sold additional preferred stock? Let me set this up here. Okay, so assets would actually increase. So we sold additional preferred stock. So what happens when you sell stock? You get cash. That's the whole point of selling stock, to raise capital. So our assets would increase from the cash received, but our equity would also increase because we have given people shares in our company, preferred shares, in exchange for cash. So assets would increase, the cash that we got, and equity would increase, shares in the hands of investors. So what would happen to our debt ratio? Well, remember, again, the debt ratio is total liabilities over total assets. What did we just say would happen? Assets would increase, equity would increase. There's no real effect to our liabilities, so we have to break this out. So total liabilities, and we're going to have to use the accounting equation here. So assets equals liabilities plus equity. We move that around. We see that equity or liabilities equals assets minus equity. So let's change this to total assets minus total equity, like that. So we increased assets on both of these sides, right? But then we also increased our equity. So that means we had a double increase here, divided by the total assets. Essentially, this nets out to debt ratio would decrease. I'll capitalize that for you guys. Since assets increased, but no change to liability. And think about it, if we're having more assets but less debt, there's no change to our liabilities, more assets per the existing debt, then it would make sense that our debt ratio would decrease. So that wraps up this video here. If you guys have any questions, feel free to email me or message me on Canvas. Thank you guys so much. Have a great Thanksgiving. It's been really awesome being you guys' TA. Let me know if you have any questions. Have a good one.